Hi there, this is Solitude Ronan from Solitude Ronan Films, and welcome to a special random review. Today's random review is on the Parallax view, the brand new release from Criterion. This is the Region A Blu-ray, spine number 1064 for those counting at home, made in 1974, directed by Alan Pakula. This is one of my favourite films of all time. It was in my top 150 favourite films not ranked video series. It's one of the quintessential 70s films. It's certainly one of my favourite 70s films. And since I started this channel about 2.5 years ago, it was on one of my films that need a Blu-ray release videos that I did a long time ago, and lo and behold, finally Parallax is here. It's a film that I don't understand why it isn't talked about more, because a lot of the classic Hollywood films of the 70s, they haven't aged as well, but I think the Parallax view is as relevant now as it was then, even though it was really about things that happened in the recent past of 1974. So I'm going to talk about it. There will be a spoiler section at the end, because I can't talk about one of my favourite films of all time without going into deep spoilers, but don't worry, I'll let you know when the spoilers or the deep spoilers are coming. You really should have seen this by now. So this is the packaging for Criterion. It has a lovely booklet, which bizarrely enough smells of paint. You even have the little Parallax Corporation bit of the questionnaire, which is just a lovely detail. Because obviously Criterion releases, their artwork and their booklets sometimes vary in kind of quality or design, but this one is beautiful. We get an interview with Alan Pakula, who made, I was actually surprised looking up, only 16 films. He's one of those guys that made kind of some really good films but isn't really talked about. He made Clute and Parallax View. 2 years later he would do All the President's Men, and there's an essay as well. This was shot by Gordon Willis, who was almost the cinematographer for the 70s. The Prince of Darkness, as his nickname was. He shot the Godfather films. He did lots of work with Woody Allen. He did 3 films for Pakula in the 70s, Clute, Parallax and All the President's Men. This one has a new 4K print, because again on DVD it is a little dark, whereas you do see everything in beautiful, pristine condition. It's a new introduction by Alex Cox. Now I could be wrong, but the first time I saw Parallax was on BBC Two's Videodrome with Alex Cox introducing it. It is amazing, I've said it before many times in this channel, how many of my favourite films I was exposed to initially through Moviedrome, with first Alex Cox, then Mark Cousins. Such a great programme. There's a new programme from 2004 with Gordon Willis, which is absolutely fascinating. How he talks about wanting to shoot it in anamorphic, and in certain times anamorphic was just really used for westerns because they thought it was just for landscape, but it's really for people in the frame, the distance between each other, space, the use of architecture and people's place in front of architecture. It's a beautifully shot film as far as spatially. So that's a really good interview with Gordon Willis. There's a new interview with John Borston, who was the assistant to Pakula in Parallax View, which again is really good and really interesting. Of course, there's the essay, and there's two archival interviews with Alan Pakula, one from 1974 and one from 1995, about parallax and other things. So this is an example of Criterion at its very best, in my opinion. It's a great print of a film that deserved to get a Blu-ray, if films deserve to get a Blu-ray. First world problems, I know. That has wonderful extras, and hopefully the film will just get exposed to a whole new audience, a whole new generation, and it'll take its place rightly at the top of the films of the 70s. The parallax view refers to the slight difference between what your left eye and your right eye sees. The film is really about, very much like The Conversation, Coppola's film, which came out in the same year, or just about the same year as did Chinatown. It's all about surveillance, what we see, what we think we see, but it's about so much more. So the opening of the film isn't really spoilers. It starts with a political kind of rally in Seattle. It opens with a wonderful shot of a totem pole and then the Space Needle. So again, it's just this time and history thing. And there's a candidate of some kind giving a speech in the Needle, and he is shot and killed. And there's a wonderful apprehension of the suspect on the outside of the Space Needle, and he falls off the needle. It's a tremendous opening. And then we have this kind of faceless panel, which is essentially the equivalent of the Warren Commission coming out and saying this was the act of a lone person, case closed, you can't ask any questions. Cut to 3 years later, and the witnesses all start dying in strange ways. 6 of them, and including Warren Beatty's friend who comes to see him because she's paranoid because people keep dying, and she was there, as was Warren Beatty. So she's paranoid that she's going to be killed next, and of course Warren Beatty just kind of waves her off, and then of course it just cuts and her body's in a morgue, and obviously this gets his interest. So Warren Beatty plays a kind of downbeat news reporter. He's living in a motel room. He's obsessed to the point of almost getting fired. He frustrates his editor, Hume Cronin. I mean, there's lots of people, character actors, that might not recognise their names, but you'll know their faces. The least famous member of the crew in Taking a Pelham 123 is in this film. And again, I can't remember his name. Obviously, this film is heavily influenced by the Kennedy assassination, the Robert Kennedy assassination, Martin Luther King. The scene in the Space Needle, that assassination, was pretty much modelled on the Robert Kennedy assassination. There's a woman in a polka dot dress who apparently, when RFK got assassinated, was running through the hotel screaming, "We got him." So there's a woman in a polka dot dress in the Space Needle, and it's framed fairly similar to the Robert Kennedy shooting. How it's framed is beautiful because it doesn't do the usual shot of the potential assassin, shot of the candidate, cut back to the assassin, cut of the building music. It doesn't do that. We see it from the inside, and we go outside and people are chatting, and we see the candidate behind the glass, and then he's just shot. There's no musical cues. It's just beautifully done. Again, for a modern audience, this film might throw them a bit, because it actually expects the audience to pay attention. It actually expects you to listen to things and remember characters. There's not a lot of, there's no flashbacks to earlier in the film, so we remember who the character is later in the film. You're actually expected to pay attention, which is kind of an overarching image that we have of the 70s American films. This was made by Paramount, these are mainstream films, but they actually expect the audience to pay attention, whereas nowadays, in general, broad statements, but American Hollywood cinema expects the audience not to be paying attention, so they have to hammer home points repeatedly to keep the audience's attention. Whereas back in the 70s, you were actually expected to be relatively intelligent and be able to keep up, and that's a side issue. So he gets involved with this, so we think the film is going a certain direction, and then he stumbles across this Parallax corporation, which has a questionnaire, and we find out that it's this faceless corporation that is looking for people that may be a little unbalanced or violent or psychotic, and could potentially be training them as assassins. And Walter Beatty, Warren Beatty's brother, he wants to obviously find out what's happening and investigate. And I'll go into the later plot and deeper spoilers, but I'm going to stop there as far as the plot's concerned. But the film, I think, the reason that it stands up, and the reason that is arguably even more relevant today than it was in those days, those good old 70s. Right, I was born in 74, so I don't really remember it coming out. Is the fact the political assassinations that we see in the film, it's not all left-wing politicians that are assassinated or attempted to be assassinated. It's not all right-wing. And I think, if the film was remade now, it would probably be left-wing or liberal politicians being assassinated by this fascist, unseen, menacing corporation, whereas the reason I think Parallax stands up and is still relevant is the fact that it seems to be candidates on both sides that are getting assassinated or attempted to be assassinated. So it's more this idea of reveling in the chaos, in these unseen forces that just want unbalance and just want chaos. It's these faceless companies that just want people removed. And even though on the surface of it, it's a political film, it's not as political as you maybe think. And it's certainly not as political as the remake would be. Which I think is one of the great points about it. Plus, just the way it's shot by Willis and constructed, it's, like I said, it's all about surveillance and viewing. So Hume Cronin's office, that he has these wonderful conversations with Warren Beatty, it's kind of all surrounded in glass, and then we see the outer office of the newspaper, and a lot of the shots are from distance looking into this goldfish bowl, essentially. So again, we're always looking through glass at people. And as, it has a wonderful element of, as we go along with Warren Beatty, we are as blind as Warren Beatty is to the depth that he's suddenly in. and how far up to his neck he is. It's only when he realises what's going on, as far as the position he's in, that as an audience we realise the position he's in. So there's none of that clever, oh, we're ahead of the main character and we can kind of be distanced from it. And it's like, no, you're in it with Warren Beatty, and that's a real strength. Talk about Beatty briefly. Again, he's not my favourite actor in the world. I think a lot of the time he's a little too smug at times, whereas he starts off this film being smug, even though, like I said, he's like a third-rate reporter living in a motel, so he doesn't have that much to be smug about, to be honest. But I think in this one, he really straddles that line well, of being that kind of know-all a little bit and confident in his own abilities, to then realising slowly what he's in for, and we kind of are on his side and we want to follow him and we're involved with him. It's also a really good performance, because obviously Warren Beatty is playing this reporter, but then as he goes undercover in the Parallax and, you know, pretends to be a candidate, so he has to act as essentially a psychotic. You know, he builds these two false identities. So Beatty's performance of the reporter performing as a psychotic is really good as well. I think it's one of Warren Beatty's best performances. It's probably my favourite Warren Beatty film. Like I said, I'm not a huge fan of his, but he's really good in this. So I'm just going to go into later spoilers. So if you haven't seen the film, I can't recommend it highly enough, and I can't recommend the Criterion. Like I said, it's Region A. Hopefully at some point it will get a Region B release, but if you've got a multi-region player, this is an essential purchase as far as I'm concerned. The extras are fantastic and really informative. The 4K digital transfer is wonderful. The film's never looked any better. It's a quintessential 70s masterwork. For me, I have it higher than other 70s classics, which I won't name, but you can probably guess what they are, that I've never really been that big a fan of. But Parallax View is sensational, and it's still relevant. I mean, we're essentially living in a parallax world, you know, where government agencies are kind of loaning out jobs to private security firms. The left hand isn't knowing what the right hand's doing. We're living in a parallax world. Soylent Green is people. Sorry, that's a different film. So I think it's as relevant, even though we're a distance away from all these leaders being assassinated. The very concept of what the Parallax View is about is as relevant today as it was in 1974. I mean, I should also quickly mention Executive Action, which is from 1973, which I think I did a random review on, with Burt Lancaster and Robert Ryan, which is pretty much about people planning the Kennedy assassination as far as big business, and that deserves a Blu-ray release at some point as well. But I think I did a random review of that. That's a really good little film as well, which influenced the Parallax. Yeah, Parallax View is excellent, but I'm just going to go into deeper spoilers. So if you haven't seen the film, go away and watch it because it's fantastic, and then come back if you like, or don't. It's entirely up to you. We won't send agents after you. So one of the reasons Parallax View is so good, it has a 70s ending, and if you watch lots of 70s films, you know what that means. Again, modern audiences might be confused by the ending. It's like, what? But it's also, how many conspiracy films and thrillers, especially from the 90s and the 2000s, have you watched where one person somehow manages to bring down not necessarily a global conspiracy but a nationwide conspiracy, it's just not realistic. And the Parallax View, does it properly and ends it properly. There's so many films that you go, oh, this is really good, and then they botch the ending by having the one person bringing down the whole conspiracy, and it's like, it just wouldn't happen. So the ending is fantastic. And again, the way it's shot in that scene in the convention centre with the red, white and blue tables, lots of scenes from above looking down when Warren Beatty's trapped in the rafters after another candidate has been shot. Because if you actually remember in the newspaper, the bomb on the plane, that was one side candidate, and then the guy who gets shot is the other candidate. So again, it's an example of they were going for both candidates. It's not one-sided in any way, which again is a masterstroke. Not just making it's all, candidates on the left or candidates on the right that are getting killed. The fact that they try and kill both. Again, it's the fact that the speech is going on as he's being killed, the fact that the speech is going on while he's down the front talking about his golf game. Again, even in the 70s, we're getting this idea of politics just being a show. And obviously we've just went through several years in America of politics just being show business and just being a spectacle. So even back then, they're already doing that with the razzmatazz, the cards and everything. But the film has so many great set pieces. I haven't even talked about the riff on the Clockwork Orange kind of programming video. Obviously Malcolm McDowell in Clockwork Orange gets assaulted with all these images, and the scene in Parallax is just wonderful again, with the images with love, mother, father, me, home, country, God, enemy, happiness. That like 3 or 4 minute assault of images is just a standout scene. Said obviously the Space Needle scene at the start, it's got an amazing opening, it's got an amazing ending. It's just a sensational film. It has a proper ending. Personally, I'm really upset when Hume Cronin dies, because again, even in the small scenes that we have with him, he's a really likeable character, and again his death scene is done in such a beautiful way. It's just a slow pan round his office, and then it pans back and he's dead. I mean, obviously you know he's going to die because you recognise the guy from earlier in the film. But again, it's just like so beautifully done. And again, this film, with the exception of the bizarre brawl scene that's in it, which it's funny because again the interview with Gordon Willis is so good because he actually talks about the things he liked in the film, the things he could have done better in the film. I mean, Gordon Willis is, one of the best DPs of all time, and he's like going, well, I could have actually did something better and I didn't really do that very well. But it's just so subtly done, and again it's just another example of those 70s films, very much like The Conversation, where you actually have to pay attention to what's going on. I know that seems a bizarre concept in today's American cinema. You actually have to listen and pay attention. It's a stunning film. What it's about, again, it's less political than you actually think it is. Well, directly political as far as one side or the other side. It's just so good. It's one of Beatty's best performances. I am repeating myself and rambling, but it's just so good. I mean, for me, getting Parallax View on Criterion or on Blu-ray in general is up there with Matewan, getting a Blu-ray release on Criterion, Come and See, getting a Criterion, Mammoth's Things Change, which is coming out an Indicator in March, Schrader's Light Sleeper get an indicator release. It's just, it's a very moving time. If you're a fan of Parallax View, it's amazing that it's finally here, because Paramount aren't great at releasing Blu-rays, so it's amazing that Criterion got it. Still sensational, still one of the best films of the 70s, in my opinion anyway. But please let me know in the comments what you think of the Parallax View, if you think it's underrated or overrated or just okay. Have you ever filled in the Parallax questionnaire? And if so, please don't contact me. Yeah, leave comments below. I think it's amazing, and certainly the Criterion release of it is amazing. I think I've said amazing quite enough. Silent Green is people. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying be very careful who you're watching and don't fill in questionnaires that you don't know what they're actually for. And hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. Cheerio!